Hello, we're delighted to have everyone here today. So to kick things off, I'm Africa Cook and I look after our strategic accounts in North America and am also leading the sales team in EMEA. So the stars of the show here, we've got Gary, our Genius Sports IT infrastructure team lead, and our Ably CEO and founder, Matthew Ryden. So if you guys want to say hi.
Hello.
Hey everyone, thanks for attending.
So, we're delighted to be doing this today because it's been a real pleasure working with Genius Sports over the last 3 years or so. So we're going to share some insights into the partnership and how we've been working together. And Matt and Gary will really dive into the details of Genius Sports's shift to cloud-based, event-driven architectures with a focus on real-time data streaming to deliver live sports data to sports leagues, bookmakers, and media companies. So I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you, Africa.
Yeah,
thanks everyone.
So very quickly, a little bit of housekeeping. So we're all in listen-only mode, so please do pop your questions in the chat box, and we'll have 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So to help contextualize the discussion, I'm just going to give you a quick intro to what Ably is and does, as I'm sure you're all probably quite familiar with what Genius Sports is and does. So Ably is essentially a serverless platform built for distributing real-time events to and from the edge and over the internet. So developers use our SDKs and APIs to really quickly build and scale performant real-time applications, so they don't have to worry about infrastructure, reliability, durability, uptime, performance. It's all just handled silently by Ably. As you can see from the logo wall, our customers span like a huge range of industries from sport, fintech, edtech, DevOps, gaming, social media, travel, logistics, like it's kind of endless. And so aside from the sports data feeds we're going to talk about today, common use cases can include things like group or one-to-one chat, multiplayer gaming, live asset tracking, multi-user collaboration. So when you've got state synchronization across all instances with like multiple people working on a document simultaneously. So kind of to help you understand more what we do across all these different use cases, I'd say that the one thing that really unifies all our customers is the criticality of the data. So we're used in the most business and safety critical applications where every message really counts. So every data point needs to be sent to and from the front end over the internet with reliable, low latency and complete data integrity, even if like the users have unreliable, flickering internet connections. So to give you a much more thorough overview of Genius Sports before we dive in, I'm going to hand over to Gary.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of background about the company and myself. So I've been with Genius Sports for 8 years plus now, and in that time, we've grown massively. It's been an interesting journey, been a very interesting journey, and over time we've moved more and more towards needing to utilize cloud platforms as our customer base has grown and as our customer base has grown around the world. So we partnered with Ably, as Africa said, about 3 years back because we really needed to have a replacement for some of our in-house systems, mostly our RabbitMQ messaging systems, and we needed something that could deliver these messages to our customers that were all over the world. So that's been a key project for us, and there's been other projects going on as well. We are shifting mostly to a cloud-first strategy. We've still got traditional applications that need some on-prem servicing, but yeah, it's been a journey. The one nice thing is working with Ably has actually made that journey that little bit easier. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Gary. Do you mind maybe telling people a bit about what the data is and like what your customers are and what they're using it for?
That would probably help, wouldn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the data that we process is actually gathered ringside or sports side or match side at various games. So the example I tend to use is at football matches. Pretty much everything that happens at a football match has to be collected, dealt with, processed by our systems. So even if there's a thing like a corner kick or a goal or a throw-in or anything like that, that data has to be processed, and it has to be processed as quickly as possible, because we send that data down to bookmakers. Sometimes we'll display it on their websites that this event has happened, this change has happened, because all of that can affect the odds that the bookmaker will offer on that sport. And as I say, I use football as an example because it's the one I know the best, but this happens across a multitude of the sports we cover: football, baseball, basketball. There's a joke within the company that the only sport we don't cover at the moment anyway is tiddlywinks.
I'm sure everyone would love that.
So maybe, I mean, given it's bookmakers, can you maybe elaborate on like how sensitive they are to latency? I mean, what are the constraints that you have to work around?
Yeah, so latency is a major concern. The worst event we could have happen is we tell a bookmaker that something has happened. Like, again, I'll use football as the example. A goal has been scored, and if we tell them that late, then people can put a bet on something that's already happened, which will cost the bookmaker money and it'll cost us money. So we can't have that. We have to get that event to the bookmaker as quickly as possible so that they can suspend the market and people cannot put a bet on something that's already happened.
I'm assuming the only way people could even ever circumvent that is by being in the stadium, right? I mean, my understanding is video broadcasters typically, I mean, way more latency than the type of data you're delivering. Is that sort of accurate? Yeah.
These days, a lot of the live streaming is a few seconds delayed anyway, which is quite useful. But if you've got people that are match side and they've got a mobile phone, they can place a bet on the mobile phone. They can see something happen, so the market has to be suspended. And sometimes what we'll try and do is we'll try and suspend the market just before something happens. The general consensus is that it's better to suspend the market early and miss out on a few bets than it is to have someone place a bet on something that's already happened.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Maybe it would be really useful is to hear about, the discussion topic today is really about your journey towards more cloud-based, platform-based messaging solutions. But maybe tell us a bit about how you've been doing this in the past. I mean, maybe back when you started almost 8 years ago, what was the approach to kind of processing this data and beating the odds, right? To your point.
Yeah. So the process that we have is, the process that we had is really on-prem RabbitMQ servers that were processing the data as fast as they could. It was taking that data from our, basically what we have is we have clusters for each of the sports that we look after. And what happens is they process that data as quickly as possible so that through the RabbitMQ servers so that we can get that data to the customer as quickly as possible. But this was all pretty much handled on-prem. It's all handled out of our data centers, and we had to get that data to the customers as quickly as possible, even back then. And of course, as our customers have grown and as they've grown around the world, having the data go from one location to another, certainly all across the world, has increased the latency quite a bit. NFL is the one that we've got in the diagrams there, and that's been so important to get that data across to them as quickly as possible. And it was really with NFL that we started looking at Ably, and we started looking at a dedicated solution to take on this load, because one of the issues that we have really is sending that data to other locations around the world. The on-prem solution does the job and it works really well. We needed to scale up. We have a lot more data to process with NFL, and we needed to have a solution where we could pretty much just say, do you know what? It's your problem. You take care of this. We don't want to deal with the hardware. We don't want to have to deal with some of these issues. You can handle this better than we can. And it's been quite handy to be able to offload that data to Ably so that we can have Ably process it and deal with it and ensure we've got that consistency of the message being received and being sent out to the customers.
So just actually looking at this diagram now, I suppose my understanding is that, in terms of the shortcomings, you've got, as you mentioned, capacity, hardware, provisioning, all of those sort of things. But actually, as you became more global, I'm assuming that model really started to kind of come under pressure because you have to have a RabbitMQ cluster wherever your customers are, right?
Pretty much, yes. We face two issues really. So the RabbitMQ system that we have it's resilient. If there's a problem, we have failover capabilities. Everything is dual, triple, quad networking, so that if there's a networking issue, it will carry on working. But the problem is, the more hardware you add into the system, the more risk there is, or the more chance there is of one of those bits of hardware having a fault. So we kind of get to the point where every few months we're going to get an alarm, we need to go and change something, power supply disk, something like that. And the more sports that we add, in fact, the more successful the company is, the more that hardware has to grow, the more the expenditure is there to grow that hardware, the more spare hardware we need so we can react quickly when there is an issue. Because even though we can survive if a disk fails or if a networking link goes down, or even if an entire server goes down, we still want to get that capability and that capacity back up and running as quickly as possible. So it became, we were sort of heading towards this point where it was almost monthly, daily type of trips to go, hang on, we've got this disk issue, we've got this issue, we need to go on and fix it. And moving across to Ably means we don't have to worry about that.
Yes. So, okay, fine. So, I mean, that kind of leads on to, I mean, obviously your architecture is now more cloud focused. You have chosen Ably. I mean, we're an edge messaging solution. For people listening in, I don't know if you're aware, but Gartner have recently categorized Ably as an edge messaging solution. They've created a new category for us and a number of other vendors. They believe we're very distinct from traditional messaging solutions. So you've got things like RabbitMQ, they describe as application messaging. You've got systems like Kafka, which are event streaming solutions, and products like Ably, which are edge messaging. I mean, how we differ from traditional messaging solutions is that the premise by which the system is designed, the fundamentals is that it's designed to be close to where customers are, globally distributed, reducing the latency, and that allows devices and servers to communicate using the shortest path. And hence why the word edge is incorporated into that, because the system has to physically operate close to where devices are to mitigate the latency that would happen if it was operating to a single data center. So when we're looking at the earlier diagram, we would have seen that if the bookmaker in Australia was trying to use trying to get the data, it historically would have had to go through a single data center, whereas with something like an edge messaging solution, that data may originate, go through an edge network and directly to the bookmaker in Australia, which significantly kind of keeps those latencies down. So from your perspective, I'm intrigued, because you were talking earlier about the quadruple networking and the failover servers. It sounds like this is a pretty critical component in your stack. And correct me if I'm wrong, the sort of your business model is distributing data. Talk me through how you decided to I suppose, to rely on Ably to do something that is critical to your business, and why that was, it made sense for you to do that.
Yeah, of course. So the decision really was several internal discussions around what do we need to do to build on the messaging solution that we've got, because I say at the time it was RabbitMQ, and it was more a case of, okay, how can we effectively replace this solution, but in such a way that no one even really notices, because we need to keep things up and running. But how can we replace it in such a way that we don't have to change too much of our code, we don't have to really do anything that different, potentially we can get more out of it. So we started looking around at different companies for this, and Ably was one of the companies that was selected. And I wasn't actually involved in the original choice of Ably. I got involved a little bit afterwards once Ably had been selected. But the comments I got back from the devs that were involved with that trial period were, this is a great solution. This is fantastic. This will do what we want. And also, there's a lot more information we could get out of Ably, thanks to its various stats and control APIs, that we couldn't really get from Rabbit, not without additional development work and a few tweaks here and there that we needed. So Ably was this perfect solution that would start giving us a few more stats that we really needed to have, but also be able to replace some of that RabbitMQ stack so that we could move away from having to deal with those hardware issues, and we could sleep a little bit easier of a night without going, oh, hang on, we know we've got a hardware issue, we've got to go to the data center and replace a disk. But the key thing is, of course, it does that edge messaging, like you were saying, it does deliver that message to the customer as quickly as possible, and it cuts down on that latency, which is so important to us.
Yeah, I'm sort of giggling when you're saying, you get an easy night's sleep, but I suppose, like you said earlier, you've deferred that problem onto us. But
Exactly.
but
I would say an easy
fair
early
enough.
night's sleep.
Yeah, I think that's the fundamental premise of a platform as a
Yeah,
service solution, right? That you're saying this is not our
yeah.
problem, you look after this.
Well, yeah.
Out of interest, mention. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was
Apologies.
just saying, just as we grew the hardware, the more hardware we add, the more risk there is of one of those bits of hardware having a problem. That's now not really our issue. We still have some on-prem RabbitMQ servers for sort of internal messaging, but we don't have to worry. So, I mean, we worry about them, but we don't have to worry so much about them. The core and critical data is now Ably's problem.
Yeah, no, excellent. Out of interest, you mentioned that the devs like it. Have they started behaving differently now that they don't have to worry about infrastructure? I mean, now that they sort of, they can just, I suppose, provisioning is no longer something they need to worry about. Has that changed anything for developers?
Um, I mean, yeah, yes and no, because the whole point with Ably is that we could drop Ably in and it's a message queuing service. You can point your app to it, it receives messages, it sends a note saying I've got that message. So from a day-to-day perspective, no, it doesn't change anything for them. It's there, it works, it does a job the same as RabbitMQ does. But from a capacity point of view, there wasn't so much worrying about the capacity. There wasn't so much worrying about, do we have the capacity on the network links on the RabbitMQ servers? Do we need to order additional hardware? Now, most of the hardware concerns is taken up by the infrastructure team. But it also means I didn't have to go to as many meetings discussing, do we have the hardware capacity? Can we get stats out of the system and all that kind of stuff? It also meant that the devs could pull back their stats for their own applications, and they can start graphing those a little bit easier than they could do with RabbitMQ. And it also meant that the sort of day-to-day maintenance of having to upgrade and making sure the apps worked with the system, all that kind of stuff, we didn't have to worry so much about that.
Nice. And for customers, has it been any different for customers?
So I don't know from the customer point of view, because we've got teams that deal with the customers directly, but I'm hoping that they've seen the messaging get there on time and there's been no issues. As far as I'm aware, there has been no issues or no complaints about an event arriving or a message arriving after the event has happened. So as far as I'm aware, everything has been really good.
Yeah, because I think something was sent to me about, I don't know, it was a few months ago, and it was really nice to see that you have some public documentation up now of how your customers can use Ably directly to get their data. So my understanding was that customers became a bit more self-service, and that they no longer needed some custom integration was using, Ably provides documentation, and then you provide documentation on how your implementation of using Ably. Yeah, it was really nice to see that. That's the first time I've seen customers.
Yeah, we're moving more towards a.
That's changed their behaviors or not?
Oh, absolutely. We're moving much more towards an API-driven model where customers can get the data they want, select the data they want, and manipulate that data in any way they need to deliver the service they need to deliver to their customers. So Ably's allowed us to do that without having to do a lot of additional dev work.
Well, that's great. And so kind of moving forwards, what's coming next for I mean, from a infrastructure technology perspective, where do you think things are headed for you and Genius?
What day of the week is it? Because every week is a new challenge, a new idea. So effectively, what Ably has let us do is it's let us not have to worry so much about maintaining the RabbitMQ stack or doing the dev work to build our own version or improve our version that we've got. So it's freed up the time there, which means we can do other work, which is awesome. There's always other projects to do, but the key takeaway from it is it's really allowed us to add additional services that we can deliver to the customers. It's allowed us additional options so that we can do this additional graphing and pull back the stats that we need to have. So it's let us do a lot of that. But going forward, a lot of it is a lot more cloud-based, a lot more cloud-focused. Cloud first is our strategy, and we will be moving more apps across to the Ably platform. So there's a little bit of refactoring to do there, but we are moving towards a much more cloud-driven refactoring the apps and making sure we have that approach so that we can respond a lot quicker, that we can scale out, we can scale down as and when needed. We're doing all the traditional DevOps practices, the automation, infrastructure as code, all that kind of thing. So it's it's effectively in a lot of ways, from the app's point of view, it stays the same in that we still have those apps, it still delivers the data, but everything changes to deliver those apps a lot more resiliently, a lot more effectively and efficiently.
I see you. So I was just looking noticing on the slide. There's you talk about lambdas. So I'm assuming the appeal of lambdas is the fact it's a bit like Ably, right? You don't have to worry about where they need to be or how many of them you need. You just use them, right?
Yeah.
Is that you
Yeah,
using more lambdas?
Well, that and the fact that you Lambda, you only get charged for what you use for the time that code runs. So from a cost perspective, it's really good, and having this monolithic server sitting there gobbling up power and networking and needing us to go and tend to it and water and care for it and all that kind of stuff. So it's really handy. And again, it comes back to just that approach. It gives us something extra that we can offer the devs, offer the customers. It gives us an extra method of being able to do the things that we need to do.
Excellent. And something we're seeing is, when we started Ably, we had this vision that the vision for Ably at the time was we believe every consumer would expect every application to be real-time, collaborative, just always up to date. And I would actually say I would go as far as to say it's now table stakes for companies. It's well, maybe not for companies. It's table stakes for consumers, right? They just expect this now. And obviously engineering wise, it's quite a big shift towards event-driven. What do you think from in the sports space? What do you think now that consumers just expect more engaging experiences? Do you think there's changes we're going to see happening and maybe demands on Genius as a result?
Oh, that is a question. I honestly don't know. I just look after the servers. Obviously the key takeaway is we need to get the data to the end customers as quickly as possible. We need to respond to their needs as quickly as possible. Personally, I think the biggest change that we will see, and there's actually one we've already started to deliver on with some of the APIs that we're doing, is the fact that customers don't want to say to us, we want the data to look like this. Each customer is going to have their own needs. In fact, they do have their own needs. But the customers are going to want to say, we want to take a feed from you, but then we want to do things to it. So it's the same thing that we are saying to companies like Ably. We want to be able to take that data, do things with it, and then present it to our own systems. So having the app and having the ability to say to our customers, here's an app you can use, here's some data you can pull back. If you don't want to know about how many goals a player has scored, fine, you don't have to subscribe to that. But if you want to know the amount of teams a player has played for, or the amount of transfers a company's had, then you can subscribe to that and pull that data back. And it's the ability to offer that sort of granular data and those APIs and that sort of information that I think is going to be key. And that's just almost like a value add that we can do by using platforms like Ably and other services that we've got, because it just lets people subscribe to what they need. But again, the number one focus for us is really delivering that information to the customer as quickly as possible, especially when a live match is happening. We've got to respond so quickly.
I love the idea that people can self-service the transformations on the data that they need, not just the channels of data, but even what parts of the data they need. So that's great.
Where possible, that's the ideal scenario. It's so important that the customer is king at the end of the day, and it really is what they say goes. So we're trying to provide them with those options, with that capability, and it's the same internally. Our devs will be saying, we need this for this application, we need that for that application. So we have to respond like that and make sure they've got the data that they need. And it's just a matter of just seeing what we can do to provide them with that flexibility, both internally and with our customers. As I say, the customer is king. What they want goes.
Customer is always king. Well, with that, thank you very much. I think that was great. It was really good to hear about how you've been working with Ably, and I'm glad we've been instrumental in your move towards serverless sort of cloud native. So that's great. Abigail, maybe hand back to you. I think there's some questions have come in. I don't know if we want to jump into that.
Yeah. Does everyone want to pop some questions in? I just had one really selfishly that I'm gonna pop in first. you don't mind. Like, I was just wondering, do you think that it will get to a point where if someone's watching the match live, like pitch side, like that the bookies will actually be able to keep pace with that?
Yeah, we've already got techniques and mechanisms in place so they can handle that. One of the things that I know is being looked at, and unfortunately I'm not involved with it because it does sound really interesting, is AI and watching the game live and being able to react before something actually happens. The ideal scenario for us really is that we can send a message saying close the market before something happens because of predictive algorithms. And I know that's something that's being worked on. I don't know the detail, but it does sound super cool, and I can't wait to see the results of it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Nice.
So the AI, how would that work? Is it just based on like predictions? We know that these like players would probably produce that, or
I have no idea. As I say, it's something I really am looking forward to finding out a bit more about myself. I would guess it's based on, sort of the distance from a goal or something like that, and what's about to happen. It's probably one of those cases where we would need it to be just a little bit aggressive in terms of closing markets. So, as I said earlier, we'd rather miss something than have a goal being scored and people being able to bet on something that has already happened.
oh, very cool. So I'm going to ask the cheeky question because the audience wants to know. But are you able to kind of share some insights into the kind of scale you're operating at? Like, what kind of throughput are you dealing with for like the NFL, for instance, and like how spiky is that?
So NFL itself, I don't know. I know that at the moment we've got something in the region of 80 apps running on Ably. I know we've upgraded the package with Ably several times because we have a lot of scale down at certain times of the year because obviously different sports happen at different times, and then obviously we scale up. So some weeks we could have just a few hundred sort of games going on, but when there's peak football season, when there's basketball, when there's baseball, I honestly don't know the figures, but tens of thousands of live matches could be going on at any one time. In terms of messages going through the system, well, if you think about a football match, every single thing that happens is a message. The players arriving on the pitch, the kickoff, the goals, a player being sent off, a player getting a yellow card. Every single thing that happens is a message. I believe there's something in the region of tens of thousands of messages just for a single match. So now you imagine that across a typical Saturday afternoon with all the matches going on, and then you imagine other sports going on as well. Baseball, basketball, cricket. It's tens of thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands, but an actual number, I'm afraid I don't have it off the top of my head.
And 24/7, I imagine, as you go through the different time zones, it's one thing after another.
Absolutely. It's as one event ends, there's another one kicking off. I think that a little while ago it was tennis that was the big one, and obviously we've got Wimbledon coming up soon, so we'll have that going on. One of the nice things is quite often there's no major sports events when there's other major sports events. So when Wimbledon happens, the others tend to be a little bit quiet. Now, sure, that's okay for the UK, but in other countries, obviously there's other sports events going on that we need to cover as well. So sometimes when there's like a major sports event in the UK, we can do maintenance on some of the systems and make a few changes here and there because others are quiet. But because our market is growing, because we have this global market, we're finding that window is getting more and more narrow as other countries pick up as well.
Yeah, I can imagine racing against the clock to get it through.
Pretty much. It's why resilience is so important to us. And it's also why it's quite handy to have systems like Ably, where we can just go, right, that is your problem. We can send you a message if there's any concerns, and you'll just take care of it for us.
Oh, really cool. So just looking through the questions now. So we have had a question. This is recorded and we will share it with you all afterwards. Do you have an idea of how long it took you to deploy Ably? I know you weren't there when Ably was selected, but do you have any kind of...
Yeah, so I know that we were looking at Ably for a while, and I know that we did have Ably sort of almost sitting there in the background for a while because we had other challenges. So it's a slightly unfair question in that it took us several months to get up and running with Ably, but that was more because of us and other projects we had going. I know that once we sort of made the decision to focus on Ably, we got up and running with Ably pretty quickly. Now, we were lucky. Ably was super helpful. They were able to come in, and Ably's got some really good API documentation and general website documentation on how it all works. I mean, I've been able to get the APIs working, and if I can do it, and I'm not a dev, anyone can. But I would say it took probably 2 months to get up and running. And that is with a production system. Certainly with test systems, we had them running beforehand, but to do it with production, there was internal things where we have to make sure that everyone's on board, that documentation's been signed off, and then we're ready to go.
And roll it out for the different clusters for the different sports.
Completely correct, yes. We have to be able to change over at certain times. You know, we can't just do it at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon for football because it's just way too busy. So we would be cutting over different systems at different times. You know, we have our test and dev systems, so we do those first because we can sort of do those almost at any time. Our UAT systems are used by customers to test their own code, so we've got to be a little bit careful about that. And then obviously production, we have to be super careful about.
No, very good. Thank you very much, Gary. So we've got a question. Let me get this right. Do you think that, do you have an idea of like what your customers, I know you're maybe on the infrastructure side, so this might be a little bit tricky, but like, do you have a feel for kind of what your customers are doing once they receive the data and how having it pushed to them via an Ably WebSocket kind of helps them kind of, I suppose, reach their innovation goals more easily?
Yeah, so I mean, the idea with the data we're pushing is they can do what they want, but a lot of it is dealing with the odds. So they will put their own odds on the data we send them. So if we say a goal has been scored, they will look at that and go, right, we need to change these odds so that we can process that data and make sure that, you know, we're not setting a scenario up where we could cause ourselves problems, you know, in terms of the bets received. So a lot of them are processing that data. Some are taking that data, pushing it to their own websites. So it's all sorts of things they are doing with that data.
Yeah, and every message counts.
Every message absolutely counts. There are some messages that are more critical than others. The messages that say close the market, don't accept bets, they are super critical because, you know,
I didn't realize you were actually saying those close the market events. I thought that they would have logic that when they receive the next message from you.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it is both. So we will send a message saying, you know, we recommend that you stop the market, but they will have their own logic that says maybe if a goal has been scored, we're going to do this anyway. But it's all a matter of how the customer wants to consume that data. We're just there, in a lot of ways, we're there to give them options. And they can take that data, they can do their own thing with it. And this comes back to why it's important that you know, we're able to offer the customer the ability to effectively pick and choose what they want to subscribe to and deal with those messages any way they wish to.
Do you think in the industry there's still lots of polling going on, or do you think most data flows are event-based now?
Oh, there's still a lot of polling going on. I think the move to event-based is gathering steam. It's certainly something we are doing, but there is still room for polling. There's still a lot of that going on.
I had a call not that long ago, maybe only 9 months ago, with a company that was distributing real-time data via FTP, which is just astonishing. But it works, exactly.
I mean, sometimes that's the thing. You go with what works, and it's about that customer choice. If the customer needs or wants FTP, why would we say no? Why would they say no?
Do you ever have issues where like the data being inputted on the like court side is actually wrong? So like, and how would, like, is that even possible? Maybe it's not even possible.
That's a great question. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I mean, potentially, yes, the wrong message could be sent. I honestly don't know the answer to that one. I'm curious myself now. But certainly, yeah, there's a possibility that I know in the past we've had potential issues where, as I say, that closure message hasn't gone out. So you know, markets have stayed open when they shouldn't have been. But wrong message, it must have happened at some point just because of the amount of messages that we send. But I know that there's a lot of the push into some of the algorithm stuff that we've been looking at is to try and avoid some of that and be able to process that data a little bit quicker. But yeah, what a great question. I don't know. I can try and find out though.
It just kind of blows my mind thinking about like the scale of the data and the speed and like all the different players in the ecosystem. It's like, what would happen if something at like point number 1 was wrong and the wrong data point, like, I don't know, it's my imagination running.
It's a great question. It's actually something I didn't even think about. I don't know if that's sort of a testament to the people that we have doing this, that it's not even something I consider, because they sit there, they look at these, they react to them, and they do a fantastic job. But it must have happened at some point.
Yeah, definitely would if I was there. So we just had a question come through. So any major lessons learned along your journey as you've been shifting to the cloud, and how far are you from where you're trying to get?
Let me deal with the second part first. So how far are we from where we're trying to get? The problem is, I think we'll always be the same distance from where we're trying to get, because where we're trying to get keeps moving as we keep doing stuff, as we bring on customers and all of that. So it's an evolving journey, but we are, I don't know, 30 sort of 40% to where we sort of want to be with the full cloud based infrastructure. We have challenges with legacy systems that we have to move. And in terms of sort of lessons and challenges with using Ably, probably the biggest lessons that we had was dealing with the alerts we were getting from Ably, because it was a shift. It was a different type of alert, and it's more about reacting to those alerts, and even in some cases understanding those alerts. For me as well, I had to sort of understand the messaging architecture in a little bit more detail than previous. So I was learning some of the new terminology there to understand that. But no, a lot of it for us was really learning about the way the messages came in and reacting to those. Sorry, not messages, the alerts from Ably itself, and reacting to them, and just making sure that we understood the sizes of the message that were going through the system. And also making sure that, as additional apps were added, we were monitoring to make sure we didn't suddenly overload the application and cause issues for another application and pick up burst charges. And a few times we did hit the burst limits. But what we're trying to do is move towards a much more predictive system, so that we know that, in a month's time, we're going to be dropping the number of messages because the environment's quieter. But then 2 months after that, it's going to pick up. So we might hit burst charges, and to be ready for that, and so that we know what's going to go on. But trying to predict the amount of messages going through the system, it's needle in a haystack, because we don't know what's going to happen in a game. If we did, it'd be brilliant, but we don't know what's going to happen. So one football match may be just a few thousand messages, another may be 10,000, because something strange has happened and someone's run across a pitch, and there's been a pitch invasion, all that kind of thing. You just don't know.
Would you do stats for a pitch invasion?
To be honest, we'd probably suspend the market. I don't know if they'd offer a bet on, there's going to be another pitch invasion. I'm sure some people would, but at that point, we'll probably just suspend the market and go, hey, there's nothing we can do at the moment.
So I've got some good news for you, Gary. Someone in the audience has actually been able to answer my question. So if the wrong message is sent from the ground, then Genius would send a correction message, and the bookmaker would have to resettle the result.
Right, yeah, I'm afraid that's an area I'm not too familiar with, so thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions from the audience or insights to share?
Sorry, just one thing. I don't know, can you hear me, Africa?
Yeah, we've got you, Matt, but you're frozen.
It looks like I'm frozen. I'm frozen, yes. I don't know why my video's frozen. Apologies, everyone. And also looking to the side. But Gary, you mentioned something that reminded me, because you said you weren't around right at the beginning, and I was around in the early conversations with Johannes, and we were doing load tests at the time. And I distinctly remember, because the thing that triggered my memory was you just said large message sizes. And I remember we were testing 9,000 messages a second at 1 megabyte messages, which we hadn't ever historically done. We'd always operated on the basis that everyone would do small messages. And then Genius came along and said, no, our messages, because you did incrementally, the message sizes would increase throughout the match, that you would get up to 1 megabyte messages.
Yeah.
And I remember that put a new dimension of pressure on the system to see if it would hold up with large messages, and it did. I remember a bit of people being a bit nervous about it because we've never done anything like that before. But yeah, no, I think Genius has quite a unique requirement there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that goes back to some of the applications that we use and the way they process messages. So I'm not 100% sure which applications do or which sports do this, but with some of the sports, I know that we have, like, the game has started, this event's happened, that event's happened, and the messages just keep building and building. So you start off with a nice small message, but then it just grows and grows and grows until the end of the match. These message sizes are, potentially at that 1 megabyte.
Out of interest, why do you increase the message size? Is it for data integrity concerns? It would be such a disaster if part of the payload was lost.
Potentially, yes, but with certain games and certain sports that we cover, it's quite handy to have all that information there so that we can process and literally read through almost like from sort of top to bottom that all these events happened in that sport, and everything is there captured in that sort of final message. It also means that we can store that information in some of our database systems so that we can replay matches in the future should we need to. So if there's any queries, we can go, do you know what, we have this entire game stored in this message. Let's just go and replay it and see when these events happened and what we did.
I'm imagining it
architecture. Yeah, I mean, architecturally, it's inefficient, but it's simple, and that's often the right solution because it means developers. I remember these sort of conversation. Developers on their side will always have the most recent game state in a complete state. And I think one of the things we were doing, and I'm not sure if your customers are using this or not, Gary, but because of that design, we talked about that Ably supports deltas, so that when you could publish a large message, the customer will receive a large message, but actually over the wire, we would only send the diff, and we would calculate those diffs in real time. I'm not sure if that's actually being used by your customers or not, but I know that was quite a key part because it means no one needs to change architecture on either side, yet you can do this efficiently because we generate the deltas internally.
Yeah, I don't know if that's being used. I know that's being discussed, and I know it's something that we do want to use because there's the efficiency there in that it is just that delta that's being sent. But it means that, as you say, no one has to change architectures. So I know it's something that's been talked about a lot, but that's something I'll certainly defer to the devs on.
Do you think you could end up in a state where you have the kind of complete log in your back end of everything that's gone through, but Ably just pings the smaller messages with the deltas, and the integrity's maintained?
Yeah, I suspect that is the ideal state that we want to get to because with the diffs, it's a much smaller message size, which means that there's much less risk of part of that message being lost somewhere along the system. So it's certainly there's economies of scale in terms of the economy of scale being the smaller scale, but certainly it's quite important to have that full match state for some of the games we look after.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you go back through them a lot with customers? Is that kind of a frequent scenario? Is it?
Not that I'm aware of. I know we've had to do it in the past. I know there's been some queries, but it's, as far as I'm aware, it's not something that happens that often.
Really cool. I don't know if this is a contentious question or not, but I quite like it. So, do you have any plans to get rid of RabbitMQ entirely?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. So. The simple answer to it is yes, we do. Because we're moving towards a cloud-first strategy, what we really don't want to have is sort of, we're using Amazon, we're using Azure, but we don't want to have RabbitMQ sitting on a EC2 instance, for example, and because we don't have to look after the hardware, but we've still got to patch it, we've still got to do various tests on it and that kind of thing. What we are considering are things like Ably for more of the app, or more apps on Ably for more of the games, but potentially some AWS MQ services for some of the internal messaging that we need. But the plan would be let's not have RabbitMQ simply because we have to do a lot of the work manually with it.
Very good. Thank you. So we've had just another one come through now. So do you need encryption data security in place for any of the data you're sending? And would Ably be able to do that? Or...
So as far as I am aware, no, we don't, because the information we are sending is really just this happened in a match, and it's not it's not really sensitive data as such. Future use, I don't know, potentially yes, depending on the sort of stuff that we're doing. Certainly, as far as I'm aware, we don't send anything into a message queue that needs IDs or passwords. It is just something happened within a match.
And question for me, kind of on a, got me thinking about it. So as the like legislation loosens in different states in the US, like does that impact you directly, or is it more your customers that would need to spin up new architectures and kind of obviously try and win the new market?
Well, we're certainly involved in that. We do have offices out in the US, and we have been pushing to sort of help the market regulation or deregulation so that we can offer more services out there. I'm not going to comment on the details of that because that's way outside my area, but I know it is something that the company is keen on, and obviously the more that we can offer people, the better. And as I was saying earlier, the customer is king, so if there's something we can do for the customer, we will happily do that.
Yeah. Very good. Also, hello to the cat.
Yeah, sorry about that. This is one of my cats coming in.
I'm really glad he's come through. Very good. Let's see what else we got. Does anyone else have any questions while we've got Gary here? It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. No. Okay. I don't actually know the answer to this one. Have you got Ably implemented in all areas of your business? Does Ably power all your real-time needs or only a selection of them?
Yeah, so at the moment it's a selection. Ably was picked largely for NFL, but we are moving more and more apps into Ably. But we do also have some, I don't really want to use the term legacy because it's not really the right term, but we do have some legacy systems. We do have internal messaging using RabbitMQ. We do have a bit of a split set up at the moment. So long term, will we use Ably for everything? No, because there's certain things that, I'm not going to say Ably isn't suitable for, because that's not a fair answer, but there's certain things that there's just no point in using Ably because we have, let's say, internal messages. But certainly for the messages that we need to get to like the other side of the world as quickly as possible, and for things like NFL, definitely Ably is it's a no-brainer solution for us.
That's awesome.
I mean, out of interest, Gary, have you got plans, or are you using Kafka? Because I mean, to your point, we absolutely see Ably deployed side by side with RabbitMQ, side by side with Kafka. It's not really a replacement. It's an adjacent complementary product. Are you looking at Kafka?
We are, yes. I know one of our devs, or actually maybe several of our devs actually, are very keen on Kafka, and I know there are conversations happening directly between the devs of Genius Sports and Ably with regards to Kafka and how we can integrate.
Nice.
That's cool. Right, I think we're out of questions. I want more though. You can give it a minute or so, see if anyone pops anything in. Otherwise, we'll share the recording with everyone. And if you do have any more questions, you can obviously email us. I think we're good, chaps. Thank you very, very much. It's been super interesting.
Thank you. I just hope that's been useful for people.
Yeah, me too.
Yes. Thank you very much. And thank you for your cat for showing up as well.
Yes, I think she wants food.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for attending.
Everyone.
All right, thanks.